All right, everyone. How are you doing? I am Marwan Cameron, your host today for Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. You already know it is the best hour of your week. It is 1 p.m. in Kitsap County. It is Wednesday, February 22nd. It is a frosty 36 degrees outside. It is cold, cold, cold. And as such, the announcement is that the severe weather shelters are open this evening. So people can call 211 or 360-373-3000 so we can get them to the shelter. There's no reason for anyone to be unhoused and not undercover during these deplorable weather conditions. All right, that said, we got to get right into the show. I haven't been here in 3 weeks. So I have missed being on Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. So I'm back. I'm going to give myself the horn because I love doing this show every Wednesday, and just scheduling and everything going on has made it to where I couldn't be here. So Rob has stepped in for me, and shout out to Rob for that. But I am back, and as such, that means that the dynamic duo is once again together. So whether or not it's Wonder Twins, Batman and Superman, Mark Boatwright Frost and Marwan Cameron are here for you today. Let's bring up Mark.
Hey.
How you doing? Are you Batman or Superman?
I always kind of lent myself toward Robin because he was a much more interesting character in some ways. But yeah, and I'm more of a Marvel person.
Okay.
So,
if you say Robin, now you got to say which Robin because there's like 4 Robins.
Oh, good God. I'm actually Nightwing. I like the post-Batman Robin.
Yeah, he's my favorite, but I do like his son, Damian Wayne.
Yeah.
So what would be our Marvel equivalent?
Well, for Marvel, who was always my favorite? Spider-Man was always my favorite Marvel character.
Really?
Because Peter Parker was more real in his having to deal with stuff than a lot of the other characters were.
I had Spider-Man bed sheets and Spider-Man curtains.
Having to deal with?
If you could believe that.
Yeah, did you have underoos, the Spider-Man underoos?
I think I did have underoos, but that was very short-lived, right? My dad believed in stretching a buck, so you can have a blanket for the next 5 years, but the underwear you're going to grow out of because you're 6 and you're growing like a weed.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I've always been much more of a Marvel person, and that hasn't really translated any differently for the DC universe and Marvel universe. I'd much rather watch the Marvel stuff than the DC stuff.
Well, I didn't grow up with it, so now I have an appreciation for it now. So I'm like kind of playing catch up. But I'm sure folks didn't know that they were going to tune into a conversation about underwear and bed sheets and superheroes.
Yep.
So
well, I would hum the Batman theme, except it would give us a copyright strike.
Mark, I've been getting strikes for. I've got a list of strikes right now. I don't know what's going on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're trying to get money from people, and the bots are not very good at finding the real stuff. And they usually if you challenge them, they'll go away.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm not even playing intro music now, and I'm still getting strikes. That's why when for all of you that watch us out there, it's why you haven't really been hearing intro music and outro music and things like that. They're striking literally everything.
Yeah, if you're a video, they're trying to strike you and get copyright money from you. But understand, the things creating the strikes are bots that are not conscious of anything except very small pieces of data that they're trying to get. There is no human involved in this. They're just sending out millions and millions and millions and millions of bots and knocking everything. We'll talk about some of this in the show today. So there's 2 things I wanted to say. One, to the audience, Marwan has no idea what we're going to talk about today. So as the conversation gets really challenging, hold Marwan not accountable for it. I'm the one bringing this today.
Oh.
So I want to make sure Marwan is held unaccountable for this. If he wants to become accountable, he can jump in at any time and make a comment. But I want you to know that Marwan has no idea what he's walking into today.
Do I need to put some Irish in my coffee?
You might want to start there.
Let's go. I'm game.
Okay, so I want to start today with one thing. For those of you who actually understand what this means, it's from the movie City Slickers with Billy Crystal. And Curly said, the meaning of life is one thing, just one thing. And Billy Crystal asked him, well, what is a thing? He says, it's different for everybody. But in this case, I'm going to say the one thing is the same for everybody. We as a species need to stop embracing stupidity. That's the one thing. We need to stop embracing stupidity. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
All right. Well, man, who defines what stupidity is?
Okay. If you look at our history as a species for the last, I'll make it easy, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, you choose.
Let's do contemporary.
Okay. Let's say the last 100 years.
Yeah.
In the last 100 years, we have watched our society and our lives continually decline every single year. And our way of dealing with this is othering everybody for one way or another. I mean, we've had racism for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Marwan and I have had this conversation countless times about how we have treated Black people, Korean people, Asian people of all kind, anybody who's other. We see a different skin color and we treat them as other and lesser. I mean, this is the way we've done things, and I could talk about the last 100 years. I can talk about the last 1,000 years, but it gets interesting the last 100 years because we've had the civil rights movement that was supposed to fix things, right? We had Rosa Parks. We just watched a skit done by the Black Student Union. It was phenomenal about Rosa Parks on her birthday and about the movement that ensued from there. We've had long conversations about Martin Luther King. We haven't talked so much about Malcolm X, and quite honestly, I will tell you that I don't have as much direct information as I would like, and that's predominantly because history has buried his words and his actions and his work.
Facts.
But while Martin Luther King's are held up, now does that mean he didn't have value, or does that mean that his work was challenging where Martin Luther King's was embracing? Or does it mean that it was just, if we're going to hold up one, let's hold up the least dangerous one? I don't know. But these are questions I ask. And I say this because one of the ways to stop embracing stupidity, and as you pointed out immediately, how do you define stupidity? Well, you define it by asking the questions that need to be asked to determine what is actually happening. In the last 100 years, we have protested, we have voted, we have run across social media, we have had Black Lives Matter, we have had Me Too, we have had thousands upon thousands of different marches. And I have one question. This is my first question.
Okay.
Has any of it worked?
Yes, I believe some of it has worked. Okay. Not wholly, right? I'm a firm believer that, and I've told this to some of the leaders that I work with, that we're not moving fast or hard enough, and so I want to pull the tug of rope harder. And people are telling me that you can't pull hard because people aren't ready to be yanked, and so you have to take the wins and the small incremental gains. And I'm like, we don't have time for that, right? It's like Cascadia Rising. You can look and see what's happened in Turkey. You can see the derailment in
Ohio.
Where's that? Yeah. Ohio. You know, we're watching it everywhere. You know, our bridges, our infrastructure, we're not ready. We can't handle it. And folks just want to, ho hum and, yeah, it's so very frustrating. So the for me, the way I'll answer it is yes, but too slowly, way too slowly.
And when we think about how we approach these problems, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I mean, driving for G2, I have some time as I drive people around, and I think about why is it that we haven't been getting people to go to the shelters right now? Why is it that we don't have more shelters? And one of the things I Marwan knows is a hot point for me is,
Hmm.
especially with Salvation Army closing the overnight their overnight services coming in the very near future. Bremerton does not have even a um, any kind of excuse for a severe weather shelter. They have been saying that Salvation Army is their severe weather shelter, and they only started doing the overnight situation because of COVID. And now they're going to be closing that down, and there is no severe weather shelter in Bremerton. And this is the part that really starts gnawing on me as my brain is a process brain, is a how do we solve this problem brain. I ask questions. So one of the things I say is, so I'm thinking about a shelter you and I both know about that's a day shelter that has been months and months and months getting up and running. I'm not going to talk about where it is or anything along those lines, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
And there's still no functional shelter there. Now, that would make a lot of sense in this particular time, and to have a functional shelter to take people from to the night shelter and then back to the day shelter. But there's no coordination. There's no effort. There's thousands of efforts, all underfunded, all under resourced, none of them functioning well. And this is our model.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not coordinate anything. Let's just have a whole bunch of people who want to do something struggle to get it done, and the people who need it the most are suffering. That doesn't matter because they don't matter. The homeless people don't matter. What matters is the people that have property, right?
I'll stop you when I detect a lie. Keep going.
Okay, so I watched the show on the Bremerton City Council talking about. I think the guy who does this covers it for you said the rich have gold toilets and the people on MLK have plastic buckets. And they're talking about the wastewater treatment system and how they've gone above and beyond for. And I didn't watch the whole thing, so I am not going to quote all the rest of it. But I was listening to them go through their process about how they verified this extraordinary amount of work that they're doing for a pumping station because of this one property, and how they jump through the hoops for property owners because, and they said it right up front, we go the extra mile for property owners. We try to go the extra mile for property owners. And I listened to them go through their dance and their process and stuff, and I went, wow, this is just mind blowing to me. I mean, I know it happens. I try not to think a lot about it. But I watched people go through this, and when I say we got to stop embracing stupidity, and you can challenge what that is. But from my point of view, I'm going to say this right now, and there is an aspect of cancel culture here, and I'm sure people are going to get pissed off and whatever, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm watching a degradation of basic competency that just blows my mind. Very few people seem to have even a basic level of competency in the jobs they do. We rely entirely on process with no critical thinking involved. We don't have people trying to solve problems. We have people trying to check boxes. We have people that don't ask questions because we're trained not to ask questions. We're told that the answers are already somewhere else and somebody else has done the work. Is that even remotely true? When you think about our society and you think about how we do things, we have become a society of machines, of checkboxes, of forms, of not thinking our way through anything. We react, we don't think. We don't solve problems, we create more problems by checking off boxes without looking to the consequences of what of the process. We trust the process, but we don't measure the outcome. Now, to
Mm.
tell you a brief story, I worked a contract with the state of Washington for about 3 years. I was working with customers of one of the social services, helping them figure some things out. And over 3 years, I realized that the issue that I was running into again and again and again, trying to get these people to be self sustaining and move forward, was that the system they were working in to get services were measuring success by paper being cleared off the desk and check boxes, not success of the clients. Think about that for a second. How can you be successfully dealing with clients when you're promoted, when you're benefited, when you're rewarded for clearing your desk of paperwork and filling all the check boxes in?
No, that's
Does the
facts.
client does the client even matter at that point?
No, because it gets lost in the bureaucracy, right? Even if you're
Yeah,
coming from a space of, we're doing this to help people, where there's so many obstacles that are put in place that the person getting helped is an afterthought, is a byproduct, right? It's happenstance if they get what it is that you intended.
right. And now we've been hitting crisis after crisis after crisis. COVID really brought it forward. Is that people need dramatic help, and people are trying, and the agencies are trying to do something, but they had nothing in place that would actually work. So they had to make things up as they went through. Um, and this is in no way, shape, or form a dig on Kitsap Community Resources. None. I have nothing but respect for them. But COVID caught them flat-footed. And at the point that a few years ago, I needed some help to figure things out because COVID caught me flat-footed as well. And I watch, being a systems person, I watch their systems as they're trying to put things in place to deal with it and help people. And they were completely overwhelmed, and there was nobody in there able to work through setting up a process from the top down. No one really understood how to do it. And they kept trying different things until something started working. Now, this is not, they are not new in this. They are not alone in this. This is, we have built systems where we have checkboxes and processes, but we don't look at the outcomes. We don't ask the next question. Is the process serving the need? There is no auditing going on. So this is through all of our society. Now I want to talk about how this plays out to everything else, because when you think about it, government is actually a reflection of our culture, because government is supposed to be about creating cultural stability. That's really what its job is. So let's look at our culture. We have cancel culture. You and I have had this conversation before. I was going to actually have this conversation last week with you. Unfortunately, we weren't available. Where everyone, you included, are getting canceled because you do not match what the other person thinks you should look like. I can't tell you, and go ahead and cancel me. I don't really care. But um, if you're canceling me, you don't have the brain cells to actually understand what I'm saying.
Well, Mark, can I just jump in there before you
Sure.
continue on? The scariest thing about what I'm seeing right now in America, right? And we believe in, the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression, and some are allowed to thrive and others are, destroyed. And regardless, and I've said this on another podcast, regardless of what you think of Kanye West and the comments that he made, which I believe that people were being hyperbolic with saying it was anti-Semitic, and he was talking about a war on Jewish people, which I think, they it's ridiculous. Regardless of that, when you have banks taking your ability to do banking, to PayPal and Visa and Mastercard, you are ceremoniously, or unceremoniously, withdrawing a person from society to where
Mm-hmm.
they cannot function, right?
Yep.
And all of these organizations work together, Adidas, Balenciago, to destroy that man, right? And he's not the only one. You know, Andrew Tate, there's others that this has been done to, and that is tremendously dangerous. And to me, it served as an example to say, look, if we can do it to one of the most powerful and wealthy black men in this country, what do you think we could do to you, the average person?
Exactly so. And as I was going back to saying that what this is it's a reaction and a fear of for them, it's a fear of loss of market share. Okay. And we can have, and actually, I think episode 60 is going to be talking about corporate realities. We're going to get deeply into the whole issue with corporations. And we're going to be talking about, it's probably going to be the economy issue. We're going to talk about economy. People who buy into cancel culture are refusing to think. They aren't listening. They are just painting a picture with a very broad brush and doing the easy thing. They are canceling somebody because of a perceived understanding without any context. Now, here we go. Kanye West, I don't particularly care for him. But you know something? I have an option. I don't have to listen to him.
100%.
I don't have to listen to what he says. I can choose not to and have. And the Kardashians, right down the same thing. I've never seen an episode of Kardashian. I couldn't recognize any of them if my life depended on it, except maybe Bruce Jenner or whatever his name is these days. That stuff is so meaningless to me that I just don't even pay attention to it. There are so many other things that we need to do, like fixing the bloody processes so people can get taken care of, centralizing not a control, but a coordination of services. So maybe something can get done instead of people tripping over each other trying to do something in the dark by themselves. These are things I care about. These are things where we can move forward together. But I'm going to say canceling is just another form of othering. Except with canceling, you don't have to be black. You don't have to be Asian. You don't have to be homeless. You can cancel anybody.
Yeah.
It's like an amplification of our othering of each other. Now, here's my bottom line on this. Why on earth, when we need to come together, are we so focused on more ways to other each other? If we don't come together, we aren't going to be here. What part of that don't you get? You don't believe it. I understand this. It's hard to believe that everything will collapse. But if you're over 40 years old, you should have stopped and sit down and think about how much your life has declined in the last 40 years. It's obvious, and it's not suddenly going to get better. In the last 40 years, we have lost so much, from the nutritional value to our food, the quality of life, our education or lack thereof, the quality of our shows. I mean, for God's sakes, the quality of the commercials. I had people say, well, I watched the Super Bowl to see the commercials, and I saw them on YouTube, and I went, really? And you watched the Super Bowl for this crap?
I have unplugged myself from the matrix that is the NFL. So I didn't watch any Super Bowl commercials or the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I ever tell you why I stopped watching football?
No, why?
I am a lifelong Minnesota Vikings fan. Lifelong. Since I was like 1960s, okay? I have a Fran Tarkington jersey in my closet. Fran Tarkington was one of the first scrambling quarterbacks. He was a Minnesota Viking quarterback in 1963. I watched the NFL and the Super Bowl all the way through up to the Dennis Green years of the Minnesota Vikings. And I was really excited because the Minnesota Vikings had the best team in the NFL, bar none. They had Randy Moss, Dante Culpepper, Carter. They had a phenomenal team. And they couldn't get to the playoffs in 4 years.
Hey, even I love that team.
Yeah. and they couldn't get to the playoffs in 4 years. And I'm like going, they have the best team in the NFL, and they can't put it to bed. There is something wrong here that goes beyond anything I can understand. But they cannot. They not only didn't get to the Super Bowl, they didn't even get to the playoffs. And I decided that that's the end of it for me. There's something I don't understand, and I don't have the time to analyze. But these guys were the best of the best by so much, and they couldn't beat even mediocre teams in the playoffs. To the playoffs.
Well, as a Buffalo Bills fan who lost 4 straight Super Bowls, I kind of look at it as, it makes me a conspiracy theorist, right? The draft. Um, Sometimes I think there's, geopolitical issues within our nation on where they decide who's going to win and who makes the playoffs. I don't have any proof of that, but it it
Yeah.
it just seems like there's something to that. And then you're watching basically reality TV, right?
Yep.
And I need to check out from that because it's just not
Well,
serving any purpose.
yeah, and it's like most of the games up to that point were so pre-programmed and boring. And then I just kind of went, okay, so we're done here. There's just nothing that we can do. There's nothing I can do to enjoy the game anymore, so I stopped watching. But this is the thing. I mean, you and I both have the same questions. How is it that the teams are chosen to win or not win? Because it doesn't make any sense that that's the case, but it seems to be obvious that it is the case. But again, I'm not ready to cancel. I made a choice not to watch the NFL. I'm not asking anybody else not to watch the NFL. I'm certainly not canceling them for being, for my team not winning. And if I decide that the question is big enough and matters enough to me to actually pursue, then I'll start looking for information and doing the research to decide. But we don't do that as a species. We don't, as this version of humanity that we understand today isn't very human, and we don't spend a lot of time asking the questions we need to ask to understand why things don't work. And things don't work because we are all spending our time competing with each other instead of cooperating with each other.
Let me run something past you, Mark, and just let me get your thoughts on this. The other
Okay.
day, I was mentioning, I think this was Monday. So shout out
Okay.
to the Kids at Black Student Union, Tara Simmons,
Yay.
and Civil Survival. They had their event, Youth and Legislation Day. So we got everyone out there, and so listening to the speaker speak and listening to the youth and whatnot. One of the things that had kind of hit me was this, right? We know that capitalism isn't perfect, right? Some would say it's the best system of what we have in regards to democracy. You could debate that. A lot of folks will say, pure communism is evil and bad, right? Although there are definitely some good elements of everyone having the basic needs, housing, healthcare, yada yada yada. Would the most effective way to go forward is to create a society where it's a hybrid of the two. We're probably always going to have some type of a class system. We're not. I don't think we're going to get to the Gene Roddenberry way of life. Not that we shouldn't work toward it, but I just don't know how that's going to work. And then even then, you might say there's still a class system in that, right? Admiral, captain, whatever. Now you could aspire to be that if you want. Like there's nothing governing you from being that if that's what you want to be. But depending on what you're motivated to do, it will still create a class society in that regard. But if we
Layered. I
create
would call it layered society.
a layered society, but
Yeah.
if we would create something that said, look, everyone is going to have, you know, decent housing, good housing, right?
Mhm.
However you define that. No, it's not a 1,400 square foot space, for one person, but it's also not 400 square feet while they're, touching the bathroom and the kitchen at the same time. You have healthcare, right? You have food, you
Educate.
have education, you have access to all these things. That's the bottom. That's the bottom. That's what you get just for being alive. Now, should you want to ascend and be an inventor or be an artist or do all these other things in society, then that will allow you to go ahead and you can grow, right? And you
Mhm.
want a yacht and you want this and you want that with those things, you can do that and that can be supported, right? Just as long as it's not being supported, one, to take advantage of the basic need, right? And I don't, and I'm talking basic with a big B, not the little b, right? We're saying, hey,
Mhm.
if you're getting, three subpar nutritious meals a day, that's your basic need. Oh no, I'm saying you're getting hearty food, nutritious food, that's what I'm saying is the bottom there. And then we allow people to still exercise their self-actualization, however that looks, as long as it is not a detriment to society. Can we move to something like that? And otherwise, if it's not that, what is it? What does
It
the
actually your synonymous is the Star Trek economy.
is it?
It's the basic. It's the basis on which it is based to grow. Everything beyond basics is based on merit. So if you want to be an inventor, you were provided the education and the resources to bring yourself to a level where you can start adding and providing inventions to society to fix problems, to solve problems. And you grow, and your availability to live a better lifestyle is based on the work you do, not on some fictitious movement of money through a society and through a system. It's actually how much do you personally produce for society, whether you're an artist, a singer, a songwriter, whatever, an inventor, a teacher, somebody who processes trash and recycles. These are all things that are beneficial to society and should have no cloud over them about it being a lesser job. It's all beneficial to all of us, no matter what it is you choose to do. And you should be benefited from that in a merit, meaning that you get merits for doing the work.
And so, how would that look, Mark? Like, let's say an oil rigger. I was watching a video where there's a guy in a sewer drain and he's got these huge cockroaches all crawling all over him in the drain hole and he's trying to unplug it. I know, but that's necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we say reward or compensate that work in a way that's equitable and fair,
Equitable.
right? And
I
that we
was
can
going to say
steer people where they need to
equitably.
go.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you reward it equitably. You don't look down on that person. Now, understand people who do that kind of work usually are on the higher paid end
Mm-hmm.
of the plumbing or sewing work. These people are making actually reasonably good money. I believe, I don't know the exact number, but a few years ago I toured the Brownsville wastewater treatment plant over because they just rebuilt it and refurbished it. And the people who are there, and this is something else to keep in mind, the people who are there working on that plant, many of them have been there for 30 years and they can't retire because there is nobody to replace them. And they are all making well into the six figures.
And so then I would ask you, then what is the barrier to getting, the next generation of those folks, right? Are there
Uh,
gatekeepers that are
White
keeping
collar
it?
jobs. White collar jobs and societal understanding that people should be having an MBA so they can get rich, as opposed to being a blue collar worker and supporting the services. I mean, this is a societal mindset that has to change. We are dying for blue collar workers right now, and they just don't exist. Linemen for power companies, they can't get linemen to save their lives. The unions are all really strong right now, but they have no union employees, partly their own fault from practices of several years ago. But now people should be looking at the unions to um, to get good wages, to be able to support our society because we're at a crisis point. But they aren't because they're all going to get MBAs from whatever school so they can get rich on being a tech, doing some job in tech or something else because the goal is wealth as opposed to service.
So how do we flip it to where because I got a hell of respect for the guy in the sewer with big cockroaches crawling all over him. That just
Absolutely.
it couldn't be me, right? But our teachers are not compensated in the way that they should,
Nope.
right? Everything is flipped. So it's like, oh, we're going to pay our athletes all this money
So
to entertain
again,
us and our musicians. we're so backwards in our thinking. How do we right that?
Well, first of all, we take Robin Leach out and we chase him down the road with a bull. And anybody who promotes the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Let's look at this for a second, okay? I before we get into the answer to that question, I want to look at this for a second. You were talking about it's not a 1,400 square foot home or 4,000 square foot home. I watched a YouTube video yesterday on luxury submarines that start at
Really?
$5 million and go up to $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion to have a luxury submarine that you can travel under the water with your 20 best friends for 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. That kind of stuff just makes me stark raving crazy. The fact that we build stuff like that when there are unhoused people just blows my mind. Toys for billionaires. Now, do you know who Nick Hanauer is? Are you familiar with him? Are you familiar with the name?
Mm-mm.
Okay, Nick Hanauer is a local billionaire, though he will tell you he's just on the cusp of billion. He owns a pillow factory in Seattle. He also has Second Avenue Investments. He's done a lot of startups. And Nick Hanauer is Nick, like I know him. I've met the man a couple times, but he is unique in the fact that he has done several TED Talks about how unequitable our system is and how he started out several years ago with talks about how trickle down economics doesn't work because he's one guy. He can only buy so many houses, so many cars, and so many pairs of jeans. He alone is not going to keep the economy moving, and he can only hire so many people for his pillow factory. But if we continue to strip the people throughout the system of money, no one's buying his pillows, and eventually it's going to collapse. He's talked about the billionaires need to start thinking about the pitchforks that people are going to have and the tar and feathers at some point when it's really starting to collapse, because that's our history. We
I
go
don't
after
think
the
we're far
rich.
off from that.
We aren't. We haven't been for a long time, and it's only just barely been keeping it in check. So we have a situation, and he's talked about it lots and lots, where we cannot sustain the lifestyles of the rich and famous while the rest of us starve. A healthy economy is an economy where money transfers through all levels of the system. If the lower income people get money, they spend that money because that's the way that they have to spend more to live. But the rich, does somebody really have to spend $10 million for a submarine toy?
Well, let me give it back to you, right? What you were talking, you started this about canceling. So is there not a space for that if that's what they want to do, right? The inventor of this submarine, the
So let's
jobs
let's
that it created.
yeah. So let's go. Well, yeah. You bought one submarine. You probably kept 100 people working for one submarine. But let's go back to the conversation about value of what you do. Does the person, and I'll ask this question because it's the one that's been asked several times before. I think Senator Sanders talks about this frequently. Does a CEO of a corporation really do work that is 1,000 times more valuable than the average employee in his company?
Hell no.
So what does he do that's worth $10 million a year when his average employee is making 60, 70,000?
I you got me. But we the people allow that to happen. I believe we are our own problem.
Yes, we are. We embrace our stupidity wholeheartedly and we passionately defend it. We hold on to ideas that are so insane that it just, in any real world. I mean, I came into the day thinking about this, and I've been looking at this so much lately. I see people that I just look at and I go, "Oh my God, you really, really, really think that?" And no, I'm going to do one quick sidestep here. As you know, I watch Bo the Fifth Column, and he brought up something that Facebook is looking at offering. What Twitter was offering is a validation process, which means that if you pay them, they will validate you. And the bonus for getting this validation is they will give you further reach and more views of your articles. But this validation process has no actual validation in it. Anyone can write the check for whatever amount and get validated for it, and they will give you greater access, which also speaks to the point that they actually choke most people's access off, so people actually don't see most of what you do. 10% of the people on Facebook, my friends on Facebook, see anything I post. 10%. So if I get validated, then that means that a greater percentage, whatever that number is, will see my posts and my outreach, and we can begin conversations. So again, we're opening up a door for people to give you misinformation and be supported by a validation sticker from Facebook because they bought the validation.
You know, here's what's worse. I heard that in one of these countries here, it might be Germany or somewhere else, that these social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and the such are now rolling out a campaign to censor misinformation before the misinformation comes out, right? So they have learned from the pandemic and the anti-vaxxers, even though some of the stuff that they've been talking about has now been validated, right? That they're saying we're doing it for the people's protection. So we're going to pre-censor the information before it even gets out there for their own protection. Like this is so dangerous.
So many questions about that. First question about that is they're applying a process probably to do with a bot, the same kind of bots that close down your music on your show because they see some form of data link, which may or may not have any veracity. There are no humans involved, no consciousness, no thinking, because, of course, if you had a human involved, you'd have to pay them. And it would slow everything down.
But here's
you asked
the thing.
How we go ahead.
You don't. They're saying that they need to censor information from us for our own good, right? So we're too stupid to formulate our own opinions. But they have been, and I put this in the chat earlier, right? Because you had posed the question, and I said it's the programming, right? So when we look at our mainstream media and our main news, right? They tell us what they want us to hear, right? And it's this coordinated message, whether it's through our TV,
who owns the
movies, books,
who
news.
owns the media? Is the media owned by nonprofits? Is the media owned by any regulated body that assures veracity of the data? Or is it owned by corporations who are looking to sell you something?
Oh, definitely corporations. But even the nonprofit ones that are getting government subsidies are getting the subsidies to tell the message that the government approves.
Well, to some degree, NPR is actually pretty good about avoiding that trap, but they have their own biases.
They do.
And people can point out that they do a better job than most, but they also do it in such a way that very few people this is that area where I want to say something, and it's meant to be humorous, but I will get blasted for it. This is I think about NPR, and I think about the people in my head. In the back of my head, the humor part goes, "Oh, some wasp from Boston who pays attention to it because nobody else ever does." But that's not true. I watch NPR. I listen to NPR.
You gotta tell people what WASP means for those that
white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Some we all have our biases. I have mine too. And it's like, I have issues with a lot of the liberal people because for the same as I do for anybody else, because they take one piece of information and run it into the earth when it's only a fraction of the entire story and usually out of context.
I'll tell you, I thought this conversation was going to go somewhere else and was going to get really passionate about the conversation. But right now, to go back to the beginning when you were talking about, we're in this cancel culture. I'm seeing liberals really being the biggest culprits right now. And some of the arguments I hear is, well, the right was doing it, so we're basically fighting fire with fire. But the pendulum has shifted so far to the right that even in um, the different groups that I'm in, right? Intersectionality, right? Whether it's race or class or whatever it is, I can't go against the prevailing thought because I'm going to get canceled. So yes, I'm part of this group because
and
of my
have been,
melanin
because
or because of my
because
income, but
yeah. Well, you and I have had
I
this
dare not.
conversation offline.
Yeah,
I'm not going to talk about the stories out of school, but you
yeah.
already are getting canceled, and you're already um, being considered lighter than you need to be in any to represent your the people who look like you.
And I love what you just said there because the word is punny, right? Lighter. And the thing
Yeah,
is we have a saying in our community, all skin folk aren't kinfolk, right? Which means just because you have the same color as me, we don't seem the same, we don't see things the same way. So you're not cool, right? And so
right.
you have to your blackness is measured by how you think, right? So
How
black
much you
Republicans
Yeah, how
are
much you
vilified.
agree with me. Your blackness is measured by how much you agree with me, and I'm not
Right.
saying me as in this because obviously my melatonin levels are a little lower than yours. Um, but the point is, it goes back to the same thing. We spend so much time othering each other, and canceling is just another form of othering. We stop listening to each other. We are buying into sound bites. So the passionate question I have is, how stupid are we willing to become? Are we going to be? I mean, the meme that I put up a while back about, what do you mean we're going to be extinct? Why did nobody tell me? Because you're too busy listening to the crap around you and not paying attention. Marwan and I do not think the same. We do not agree on everything. Matter of fact, we probably don't agree on most things. But you know something? We are able to sit down and have a conversation and examine things and challenge each other and find solutions.
And I say we probably agree on more than we disagree with.
But we say it differently, so sometimes we end up in disagreement.
Yes, yes, and but through conversation, we realize that through getting through it, but we don't allow each other to do that, right? I'm coming from
Right,
here, you're coming from there, and we can't see each other's point of view. But through conversation, you can get closer together, and maybe it's one or two things that are outliers, but everything else is good. So I guess that would be one of the solutions is saying, hey, what are the things that we do agree on? Can we do that and not put the pork and the bills, as so to speak, in
yeah,
government where they're throwing other poison pills in order to basically do with what we already agree on anyway.
right. And context is everything. And our
Mhm.
conversation gives us the context. And that's the important point because the context allows us to understand where the other person's coming from. Now, I had a conversation with Terry earlier, and I was trying to use this as an example because you and I have had this conversation many times about reparations. And I don't wholeheartedly jump on board saying, yes, we should do reparations. How I say it, and you and I ran into head to head for a while on this, and I think you finally understand, is that I'm not opposed to reparations. But what I want to know is, how are they going to be applied? Well, first of all, how are we going to successfully make it happen? How are they going to be applied? And what is the goal of the outcome?
And to
Because
me,
reparations alone is just
I don't think anyone has the right to ask those questions, right? And the reason is for all the reparations that we've paid out, no one has been required to ask those questions. If we look at Ukraine, right? I mean, Biden just had a surprise visit to Ukraine, and he's earmarking even more money, right? So it's like, well, we need to have a study to study if reparations
oh,
and you know what I'm saying?
it's not the again. Let's go back to the context of the questions. The questions for me is, how do we successfully make it happen? That's a fair question. Because I mean, you know how hard it is to get Congress to agree to reparations. You've watched how hard it is. So my strategic brain is going, wow, okay, I'm not opposed to it. I think it's actually probably a good idea, but how do we even make it happen? So I started thinking strategically. I'm thinking about how would you go through the process to get that bought off and signed off through our political
Revolution.
system.
Revolution.
Okay, well, that's worked almost not at all over the last 15,000 years. What
I don't
happens is
know.
we, well,
Wait a minute. How did America get formed?
well, 200 years ago, we had a revolution to bring us away from English rule. And then 200 years later, we have taken this very pure and good, not pure, but, a reasonably good system, and we've corrupted the hell out of it to the point where we have to have another revolution. The point is, revolving is the core word of revolution. And what happens is we change and then we come right back to the same thing. What we need is an evolution.
Well, and that may happen, but my thought on that is the the revolution that happened is what built this country in the first place. And I'm a firm believer that power is taken, it is not given. And so your question, the way that you're phrasing it is, or framing it is, you know, and I look at it this way too, is okay, so how are you going to convince Congress on both sides of the aisle to say, okay, yes, we're going to pay reparations out this dollar amount, and this is how it's going to look, right? Uh, we're probably never going to convince them, because if we
Well, it's
did, or
actually,
if we could, it would have already been done.
yeah, and actually, I have a plan for how that works. But the plan requires us to be able to explain it well enough and share the information well enough that you get people on board. Because what's the first three words of our Constitution again? I can't remember.
Well,
Oh,
but
we the
here's the problem,
people.
Mark. But we, the people, are the problem. So when we elect someone who is, oh, what are the ladies in Congress known as AOC and the clan, the
Yeah,
group, the
the
gang?
progressives. The progressives.
Yeah, but they've got their own the six or whatever,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
when you even when you vote them in, right? Pelosi, made sure, hey, understand where the power dynamic is. I'm Pelosi, you're AOC. You got to play this game. You're not going to get in there. And so yeah, she's able to make a little bit of noise, but only so much. But when you really look at AOC's track record, she really hasn't gotten a lot through, right? Because one person isn't going to be able to really fundamentally make that
or even
change.
or
You're
even
going to need
six.
more and more and more.
My point is, it's going to take a long time, and it's going to require a change of mind, which goes back to my other questions, which you challenged me on. About, for the first one is, how do you make this happen? Okay, I think I have a sense of that, but then again, how, the questions that other people are going to have, or people are going to have about it, is how is it going to be addressed equitably to people? And I'm going to give you an example of this. The question that where that question comes from in heart is that there are a lot of misinformation and misunderstandings about how things work, even within peoples that work that do it. Let's use our own local Suquamish tribe as an example. Um, they get paid. The members of the tribe get paid by the profits of the casino. Okay, that's the way that works, which is in a way is kind of reparations. We
Is
won't.
that the only way?
Well, it's the way the casino, the money that the tribe makes through Port Madison Enterprises, they get checks cut so that everybody in the tribe gets benefits and checks, and they get better more than most people because the tribe takes care of their own. They have a lot of that, but there's a lot of misinformation about what that looks like, how it looks. Um, and while even members of the tribe have told me there's just a lot of people looking for handouts there and such, and that's a perception. Is it reality? I don't know. But the same thing would happen with reparations. It's like, oh, we're just going to give this giant amount of money to these people, and they're all going to be standing there with their hands out. How is that going to benefit how is it going to be the reparations that are needed? And I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I'm going to say that's one of the roadblocks to making it happen. So it's a question that should be asked so that you have an answer.
We
And
we should not be required to answer that question.
well, and you should not be, but the people who are putting it through Congress should have some serious questions about how it's going to work. What is the mechanism, and how
No,
it's
they
going to
shouldn't.
work?
No, they
Well, then
shouldn't
how?
because
And then how?
that's the thing.
Then
It's
I
like, you
don't
know what?
understand.
I'm gonna give you $10,000, but this is what you can do with the money, right?
No, no,
That's
no.
not freedom.
That's not the question. It's how to get to the $10,000. Is
Well, how do we
everybody?
have this bloated defense budget or
No,
this black budget?
okay, so you're just saying every black person in the country should get $10,000 because
Hell no.
I have no
Hell no.
idea how that works, but because that's the question I have. Is
No,
that how's
no.
it going to work?
Actually, so the number I have actually did a podcast on this, and I'll try to link it in the bottom. My number is 5 million, and it's only for foundational Black Americans. So
See, that's the answer to the
this is the
question.
this is the United States of America. So folks that are, from Haiti or Jamaica, right? That's different, right? We're
Mhm.
concerned with those that were brought here to American soil and grew up here, right? Because we have this very unique experience being African Americans on US soil, right? And so um just because you're black, because we're going on their what they've created, their social construct. That's who it would be for foundational Black Americans.
Okay.
Um, and like I said, I'll link it in there. But I
Okay.
think that's
And see,
that's
don't have the answer to that, which is why I asked the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that want to know, like I don't identify as African American or Black. I actually identify as foundational Black American. There are new terminologies that we have created, some of us, which is ADOS, which is African Descendants of Slavery, and then there's also FBA, which was a splinter uh, from ADOS, foundational Black Americans. And with ADOS, the African descendants kind of includes everyone, right? That would be Jamaicans and Haitians and everyone else, where foundational Black Americans are more concerned with those that came here to American soil, right? And that's what I
Okay.
identify with, right? Because we don't have Caribbean culture, right? So you'll see that all the immigrants typically that come over here, little Italy, little Tokyo, little Korea, whatever, they have their culture, they have their language, they have their social mores intact, where we don't have that, right? And so it is what it is. So
Okay.
that's why I believe the way that I do, and that forms my thinking and processes.
Okay. Another time when you and I are sitting down to have coffee or something, I'd like to talk to you about Creole because my understanding of that piece, I'm a history nut and I read a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff about history. So the question is, to me, I would think that the Creole folks from the Caribbean and all through Louisiana and that area would be part of the foundational Black community because they
That
originally came from Africa through the Caribbean to the U.S., all through the same slave trade.
No, if they didn't come to the US, then they would not count. They would need to go
Okay,
to, where do you say, the Caribbean? Then
Caribbean.
those the slave traders that had slaves in the Caribbean, that's where their reparations would originate from, right?
Okay,
Because then they
I got. Okay,
migrated
I
from the
understand better.
Caribbean to here. Yeah.
Okay, I understand that better now. I was trying to figure out. Well, my understanding of that is, it wasn't quite so cut and dry, but as you say it, I can understand that. Okay, all right. So yeah, see, I never knew any of that. I just hear reparations, but I don't understand the mechanism that's going to that
Yeah,
you're
well, you
looking
know
at.
what? And that goes to your point earlier with the whole cancel culture piece, right? So, because that
Hmm.
is a divergent thought from liberals, right? And then the intersectionality of Black liberals, that idea cannot be articulated or put forth. And so, what happens is, as much as a lot of, very progressive people like Bernie, that like Bernie Sanders because of his viewpoints on how America should be ran, he too falls into the trap and will have someone like a Cardi B come on and he'll give her space to have an interview when he's running for the presidency, and she doesn't represent us.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So as I say, but one of the things I wanted to point out before we close out the program today is my views on reparations and the fact that I have the audacity to ask questions or want clarity will get me canceled.
Yes. Well, I don't know. That's interesting because most of America, because they've got there's a lot of stats on there, and I don't know if I went over that. Yes, I did. I will link it into
Okay.
the description. But most Americans aren't for reparations for Black Americans, right? And so no one is getting canceled because they're against it, right? And
Okay.
there's even Black people that are against reparations. But now typically when you look and see which Black people are against reparations, they're the ones that are doing well in society, right? So they've kind of latched on to the pull yourself up from your bootstraps kind of mentality.
And then pull the ladder up after you.
Facts.
Okay. So I'm asking everybody out there today, this is my last word today, since we're running over a little bit. I'm asking everybody out there today to take a breath, to look around you, and before you embrace the stupidest thing you can find, pause and try not to. I'm watching Marwan's face.
I was trying to pause, then I was like, just you need. I would just encourage people to listen to the other side
Mhm.
and listen to everything in the spectrum to that other side.
And for God's sakes, ask questions. If you don't know, you don't understand, ask. You might learn something important, like I did today, talking about reparations. I understand a lot. I mean, not that I have a great education on it now, but I understand a lot more about it than I did before this
It,
program started.
and to be fair, like locally, yes, you would get canceled for that. When OC first started their diversity conference at Olympic College, I would see white people come in, and it was supposed to be the space to ask those questions. And when they asked those questions from a space of curiosity, and you told me this was a safe space, they were attacked. And then it's like, well, you know what? I came here. I have these questions. I don't have anyone to ask. I'm going to be labeled as racist for actually asking this question. This is the space to do so, and you attack me. Now, granted, there were some bad actors that were weeded in, but it's really obvious to know that, right?
Yeah.
But we don't know each other. So, some of those questions about hair and whatnot, although superficial in regards to the iceberg, that's what people see, and they have to have an entry point somewhere. So we've created this space. You have to allow for people to grow and learn and get that perspective, right? So I do agree with you in that regard. Like locally, yes, you would absolutely be canceled. For that viewpoint of, well, hey, where's the money going to go? How are you going to justify it? What are the outcomes of this, right?
And it never actually said justify. It's just how's the process going to work?
Right, and that's what I mean by you're saying that, but we interpret it as
Asking
justify
you to
why you should get
justify
the
it.
money, what you're going to do with it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you know me well enough to know that I am a process person. I want to understand how it's going to work.
But that comes from making relationship.
Right. Yeah. Like, maybe you and I have.
uh, I'm gonna give you the final word. All I'm gonna say, folks, is the WHO has already talked about another pandemic. We know that it's going to happen, right? There's 8 billion people on this planet, so something is going to happen. My fear is we have learned nothing or little from COVID. We're not doing anything to prepare from an emergency management standpoint. Uh, this shit has spurred us to action. This was like the hey, wake up, everyone, or the slap in the face. Wake up, figure it out, because the next one might wipe out 30 or 40% of the population, either through war, through a pandemic, or whatever else. We got to figure it out. We got to figure it out now.
Well, wiping out 30% of the population would take care of a lot of the problems we have, wouldn't it? It's a great corporate solution to this entire
No,
problem.
that is their solution, right?
Yeah.
It's eugenics on a global scale. And when you put in AI, which is a lot further along in automation, I mean, what exactly are people going to do if they're not needed? for the
Well,
rudimentary, jobs.
and the accountants are. I'm not blasting accountants here, but I call it because of the bean counters. They look at everything in a mathematical formula as opposed to a human formula. And let's be honest, part of the discussion we're having here today is that we don't matter.
Yeah.
We have been made redundant to a great degree by ourselves, by our inability to ask the next question and to do our job competently. I got to tell you, I watch people all the time, and I go to places, and I engage with people, and the level of competency in the last 30 years has dropped to the point where it's almost immeasurable. People just aren't competent anymore.
You know what I would say, Mark, too, is even if, whatever your thoughts are on slavery, you can look and see what happened. And if you think that it can happen to you, it can. It will just be packaged in
Oh
a
God,
different
no
form.
argument, no
You
argument
know,
for me.
once they could not, it wasn't legal to own slaves, right? And we went through Jim Crow and everything else and Reconstruction. Then okay, we'll put them in prison, right? Because we we can't make use of them. Oh, we'll try to kill them off, right? Through drugs and everything else, and the Tuskegee experiment, all these things. You don't think that's
Mhm.
going to happen to you? Okay,
So I
or that is not happening now, and you're not paying attention.
I completely agree with you. You will have no argument for me. And I don't know if you know this or you remember it, but I come from a Jewish background, and I had family who died in Auschwitz and Dachau. Um, and I've watched people try and erase it like it didn't exist.
Mhm.
And the Jews weren't even. I mean, the Jews, 6 million Jews, horrific. 50 million gypsies and gay people. That's never mentioned. Yeah, it can happen.
And I would argue it's happening now, and we don't see it. We're crabs in a pot. It's the slow boil.
Well, and you add climate to that
Mhm.
and everything else, and if we don't come together and learn how to talk to each other and figure out what our commonality is and stop othering each other, we are in serious danger of not being here in 60 years, and all of this isn't going to matter.
Yeah. And if you need to see it, you can look at our increasing homeless population numbers, right?
Mhm. Well, how would you find those numbers? Because they keep seeing. I have trouble wrapping my head around that we only have 6,000 homeless people in Kitsap County, and that's the number I saw from the census. I'm going, how would they even know that?
Well, when you talk to Kirsten Jewell, she'll be the first to tell you their numbers aren't accurate because they only do the count on that one day, and it's just those people that they get there, at that time, right? And so if they're not canvassing, they're not going everywhere, they're not recording. How is that? I can't remember how she said it, but they're not collecting certain demographics, so that might even miss people. So the numbers, she knows it's an undercount, and everyone knows it's an undercount. Just how much of an undercount, no one is.
Yeah, we will have a discussion about numbers in a very near future episode, because there's all kinds of numbers that get monkeyed and
Mhm.
that aren't anywhere near real, like our unemployment numbers in this country. Yeah, we can talk about all kinds of things of how that works and how that doesn't work. But we are well over. We're 10 minutes over our time today, but it's
Well,
been a
look, I
great
haven't been here
conversation.
2 weeks. I was going to be
Yeah,
talkative
yeah, and it was a very interesting topic.
for sure. Well, final word then.
Okay, opinions are like buttholes. Everyone's got one, and they usually stink. Stop and take a moment to understand that what you're saying and what you're thinking is based on some kind of reality.
And get some poopery. All
Yep.
right, everyone. The severe weather shelters are open this evening. Call 211 or G2 at 360-373-3000. We'll be back in 50 minutes for our conversation on housing. For Mark Boatwright Frost, I am Marwan Cameron. This is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. This is the Conduit Network.